If I had to describe the entrepreneurial journey in just maybe a sentence or two, it would echo that song that once I say the lyrics will be in your head for the rest of the day. It's from this band called Chumbawamba. And you've heard this song because it goes, I get knocked down and I get up again. And if I was to simply describe the entrepreneurial journey, actually, I would just say the human journey. It goes like this. I get knocked down and I get up again. Well, today I'm going to be interviewing someone who has gotten knocked down and gotten up again, not only metaphorically, but also truly, literally got knocked down. I'm going to be interviewing Alicia Doyle, the author of Fighting Chance. We're going to talk about her boxing career and her journalism career. And today is going to be a positive, uplifting day in an unpositive and uplifting world. EdTalks Live is next. Hey, what's up, party people? My name's Ed Rush, 5-time #1 best-selling author, your host for the most positive place on the planet for insanely implementable ideas. We are here Tuesdays and Thursdays, 10 o'clock Pacific, 1 o'clock Eastern. Stand by because I've got some new changes coming down the pike to our show format and also a brand new show, believe it or not. So you hang with me. I'm going to be telling you about that in just a few short weeks. But before we get into today's interview, let me just tell you, jumping on the right-hand side here on chat on YouTube. If you're on Facebook, that's below. Jump in, tell us who you are, where you're from, what life is like in the beautiful city that you're in right now. And I was kind of laughing about that song. And by the way, you know as well as I do, you're going to be singing that song for the rest of today. As I was preparing for today's show, I thought, isn't it interesting how the entrepreneurial journey, the journey of a nation, the journey of success is a resilient journey. I think I've probably failed 9 times for every one success. So maybe 1 out of 10. Now, if I was a professional baseball player, 1 out of 10 would be enough to not get me into the major leagues. If I was a golfer, making 1 out of every 10 putts would be a significant challenge. But in life, it seems like sometimes 1 out of 10 is actually an okay score because life is a series of constant and never-ending changes and adjustments. Speaking of adjustments, let me say hello to our friends in chat. What's up, Barry? Good to see you, buddy. Good morning from a slightly chilly Palm Springs, better known for sand and sun. I flew right over Palm Springs, my friend, just the other day. I was coming back from a trip up into the mountains. What's up, Robert? Good to see you as well. Welcome, everybody who's just joined us on the show. I'm going to bring in my guest, Alicia Doyle, and I'm going to do a quick intro, but I just want to say it's good to have you. We've tried this a couple times. We got knocked down. We got back up again. So it's good to have you on the live show. I'm looking forward to our conversation, but welcome to the show. It's going to be awesome.
Oh, thank you, Ed. I appreciate your patience with all those technical mishaps with the previous 2 episodes. So I'm super excited to talk.
For those of you who just joined us, you're like, what the heck is he talking about? We actually have tried this twice. At one point, the internet, the power completely went out in Ventura, California, where Alicia lives. And then last time the internet went down. But you know what? We talked on the phone after both of us. I said, I don't get bothered by things like that. Life happens.
Right.
Get knocked down, you get back up again. And so actually, I had quite a few emails from the last show that we did, and people seem to really enjoy watching me go through the challenges that we went through. So sometimes you just have to be an example of getting knocked down and getting back up again. Let me do a really quick intro bio so you know who Alicia is and the amazing person that you're about to learn from. But Alicia Doyle is an award-winning journalist who discovered boxing at the age of 28 in the late 1990s when she went on assignment as a journalist for at-risk kids at a gym called Kid Gloves. So for 2 years, she simultaneously worked as a newspaper reporter while training and competing as a boxer. Now, this wasn't modern day boxing. This was in the 1990s when the boxing world was largely dominated by men. Now, for context, I go to a boxing class. I'm actually learning how to box. I am pretty bad at it because I've only been there for just a few months. So if like Alicia and I got into the ring, she would knock me out and then I would get back up again as the song goes. But back in the 90s, it was mostly dudes in gyms. Okay. And I'll give you context. My class that I go to is usually about 10 boxers in the class, and usually more of them are women than men. So the sport has changed over the last 30 years. Alicia, thanks to you and your and the folks and your compadres who have worked with you. But during her boxing career, she won 2 Golden Glove championship titles and earned 3 wins by knockout. Her pro debut at age 30 in the year 2000 was named the California Female Fight of the Year. As a journalist for the last 2 decades, she's earned a reputation. I love this title, by the way. It's called the Writer for Specializing in Good News, which is what we need a little bit more of right now. For authoring thousands of stories about positive, inspirational, and efforts that have made a positive impact. Alicia is based in Southern California, and she's working on another children's book, appropriately called Kid Gloves. Her previous book is actually part of the banner for today's show, which you probably saw as you were coming on, which is called Fighting Chance. So without any further ado, Alicia Doyle, welcome to the show. It's good to have you.
Oh, thank you, Ed. I'm super excited to talk to you, and I'm so happy to hear that you've gotten into boxing.
Start with the story. I want you to tell the story about, you're a journalist. You're actually working on a story. You end up in a boxing gym, which, as far as I understand, at that point you had this maybe negative view towards dudes punching each other in the face consistently, and all of a sudden you became a boxer. So tell us that story.
Oh, so that's a great question. I love telling the story because I believe it was absolutely serendipitous. It was no accident that this happened to me, that I found boxing, or that, shall I say, that boxing found me. I was alone in the newsroom one night working on a story. I was the only one there, and the phone rang, so I answered it, being the only one there. And it was a community activist. She knew who I was. She was familiar with my work. And she went on with her pitch. There was a boxing gym for at-risk youth called Kid Gloves that was destroyed by El Nino rains in the 1990s. And the moment she said boxing, I turned off, because I used to view boxing as the dark side. I did not understand the tremendous beauty of the sport at the time. So I said, I'll give it to a sports reporter. He can take care of it. And she said, no, you're not understanding what I'm saying to you. These at-risk youth, because this gym is gone, they have nowhere to go. And went on to say that these are kids with some extreme challenges, broken homes. Some of their parents were incarcerated. Some of these kids were in gangs. So they needed Kid Gloves to go. They needed it as a respite and a place to be where they would be loved unconditionally. So, of course, that touched my heart. And I reluctantly agreed to meet with the owner. His name is Robert Ortiz. And the moment I met this gentleman and saw the size of his heart, I thought there's something to this. And him talking about the kids and these youths who just, their lives changed for the better because of boxing. I had to explore more of that. I wanted to know what it was about this sport that I viewed as so dark and so violent could change these children from the inside out. So that's how it started. I reported on that gym and got to know Robert and the children and their caregivers for over a year before I actually started to compete. That came later.
So interestingly, I liked how you described this. I mean, you said this sport that you witnessed from the outside in was so violent, but then you saw how it transferred, or it really transformed these young kids' lives. And I'm interested in thinking about this because, you know, we live in a world where violence is a part of the world that we live in most of the time, that it's an unacceptable form of that. But there are actually perfectly acceptable, and I might even say morally awesome ways to look at violence. For example, in a sport like that, where you're competing under a set of rules that you've agreed upon ahead of time, with a referee who's adjudicating those rules, and with judges who are also looking at those rules, that's a perfectly awesome way to go about violence. Sometimes when you're in the business world, you're executing the work that you do with a speed that is almost a violent level of speed. You're taking life by the horns. So we kind of throw it out into the bad category. And I think that's what you were doing there when you first came in there. But then you started to see what you described as like the beauty of this art. How did that transition happen for you?
It was the children that I met. And, you know, and it took time for them to trust me. You know, that's why, you know, reporting took about a year. Was just being at the gym, you know, watching them, chatting with their parents or their caregivers or whoever brought them to the gym that day. And noticing right away what lovely children they were, how very polite they were, you know, and also knowing their backstories. But just kind children, compassionate children, and the skills they learned in boxing. And this was no contact boxing. The stuff that they learned, they just learned the skills: how to hit a speed bag, the focus mitts, the heavy bag, how to spar, shadow box, those sorts of things. There was something about it that when they would master a physical feat, and the athletics in boxing are incredibly difficult. So when a child would master one of those aspects, one of a million aspects of boxing, their self-esteem would just go through the roof. It changed them from the inside out, and then they would carry themselves different. They would go into the world with more confidence. And needless to say, a lot of these kids were bullied. They deal with some problems. But I would notice a kid that might have been bullied, a few months down the line wasn't being bullied anymore because that child would carry themselves differently, and they all credit it to Kid Gloves Boxing. So that was what it was. It was the children and their testimonials and the parents. And they were just some of the most beautiful people I've ever met were in the world of boxing.
So if you just joined us, my name is Ed Rush. I'm here with Alicia Doyle. We're talking about Fighting Chance. We're going to get to her book in just a second, but we're talking about her career, or her career as a journalist turned boxer. I do find it interesting. You have, I have two boys. They're 13 and 12 right now. They've been wrestling each other since they were 2. It was just a natural part of their getting along. And a lot of the men that I know who have gotten into, and a lot of them have gotten deep into martial arts or the fighting arts in one way or another, they started that journey because they were bullied in school. And the interesting thing, and I've talked to more than I have fingers and toes to count, in almost every single case, they stopped getting bullied, but it wasn't because they were better at fighting. It was because of the demeanor in which they carried themselves. It was the confidence that they had. And I thought it's interesting how that the solution comes to the problem in a different way than you thought. You thought the solution was going to be you knocking the guy out, but it turned out they didn't even come at you anymore because of the way that you carried yourself. I think that was interesting.
Absolutely. And I saw that happen all the time. It's like you're learning this skill to prevent the bullying, but then learning the skill, it changes who you are from the inside out. So your energy changes. You have a more confident, powerful energy. And because of that, when you go into the world that way, then those incidents or that bullying, it just stops. So yes, then therefore you don't even need the skill, the knocking out skill or whatever it might be. But that's fascinating, and you're absolutely right.
So we're talking about boxing and we're talking about you as a journalist, but we haven't put the two together quite yet. How did it happen where you ended up going from a writer to a participant in this sport that you used to hate so much?
What got me into the boxing gym that day, because Robert Ortiz had long asked me to take an aerobic boxing class. It's no contact boxing. You just hit a bag for an hour. And I just never took him up on it. What got me into the ring that day was I had gone through a very volatile breakup with a boyfriend who punched me in the face more than once. And needless to say, I was pretty angry about that. I felt very embarrassed, very ashamed. There were a lot of feelings around being hit by a boyfriend. And a lot of women have that story, but I was so angry that all I wanted to do was hit something as hard as I could over and over again. That's all I wanted to do. And I walked into Kid Gloves. All I said to Robert was, I'm here to take your class. And he had gotten to know me quite a bit over that year that we had, been reporting and everything. So he knew something was wrong, but he didn't press it. Kids come in there with stuff wrong with them all the time. I was no different. And I came in, I took that boxing class. I hit that bag for an hour, and all I knew was that I felt better. For that hour, all the demons in my head, all the rage, all the anger, all the embarrassment, it just went away for that hour. And it was probably because that workout was so bloody difficult that I had nothing else. I had no room in my head for anything else, but it felt so good to not have that there, that before I knew it, I was taking up to 3 aerobic boxing classes in a row, 6 days a week.
Whoa.
Because that's how much rage and anger I had. And every time I'd go in there and hit that in a row.
So 3 classes a day?
That's how it started. Yeah.
Wait, so 18 classes roughly a week is what you were doing?
I would take them back to back because they'd have like 5, 6, and 7. And that's how angry I was. And it made me feel so better. So, as a nice side effect is, of course, I was getting in really good shape. But then just hitting that bag wasn't enough. I wanted to learn more. And, you had champions and fighters in there. And it was so amazing watching them hit the focus mitts and shadow box and the skipping rope and everything. So I just I wanted to learn more. So I just started watching in them, and then I go off on the sidelines and I do it on my own and master it on my own. So I was doing that for a little while. And then before long, other coaches from other gyms started to notice me. Being the only girl there, I was really intense. I dressed really scrappy. They used to call me the Rocky Balboa of the gym because of stuff I used to wear. I looked a certain way, trained a certain way. And then a gentleman named Stan Ward walked into the gym, and he was big in the boxing world. He passed away last year. But he approached me and he said, would you ever consider competing? And I said that I had thought about it, but that nobody would really take me that seriously because I was a girl.
Yeah.
And that's when Stan Ward told me that women's boxing was becoming very big at the time. There were only a few hundred of us in the United States competing, but that it was growing and getting bigger. And that was very enticing, of course, to be one of few women to break through. Back then, when I was boxing, women were not allowed to box in the Olympics. That wasn't made possible until 2012, which wasn't that long ago. So it was a big deal to be a female in the forefront of this sport. But it was really, Stan Ward and then all the other coaches. He was the one that put the seed in my head, and I was like, okay, let's do this. But that was before I actually, gotten to imagine all that. So there was an evolution to there as well.
I think it's interesting when you look culturally. I mean, it hasn't been that long that this has transitioned. There are a lot of things that we take for granted sitting in 2021. We have women in UFC. We've got women in boxing across all sports. The women, thanks to Title IX and a lot of the changes that happened at the college level, there are a lot of there truly is a lot of equality in the sports world, but it was never like that. I'm going to tell you a story going back to 1970. So my mom is in the Basketball Hall of Fame, not the Women's Basketball Hall of Fame. She's in that, not the local. She is in the Basketball Hall of Fame as a coach. She was a championship coach in the early 70s. But in the 60s, when my mom was actually going in through high school and college, women's basketball, this is like unbelievable, but it's for real. Men's basketball, 5 on one team, 5 on the other team, 5 go down the court together. They all go together down the court. Women's basketball in the 60s, there were 3 girls on one side, 3 girls on the other side, and 2 in the middle on each team, because they didn't believe that the girls could run the court for the whole game. They literally didn't feel like the girls had the physical stamina to be able to run down the court. And so they put 3 girls down on one side, and the other team had 3 on the other side. The other team had 3. So there's 6 from both teams together on either side. And then there's these 4 girls from both teams that run back and forth in between. And it wasn't until the late 60s that changed. And so just like I said, sometimes we take for granted the world that we live in with the opportunities that we live in. But like my daughter, who's going to boxing class with me, that would not have been possible back when I was growing up, like in the 80s. It just didn't happen. It just didn't happen. There were other aerobics or whatever. So it was people like you, Alicia, and my mom, frankly, who were able to kind of break through. But there are challenges that come along with that. So what were some of the challenges you faced? I mean, it just took courage all by itself to be the only woman in the gym, for crying out loud, in that environment where you probably, it's like, it's different. So what was that like?
Yes, it was. Being the only female in a world of men, was definitely had to work harder to earn their respect. And, and I have to honor all the women and all the competitors. I had these women warriors, these incredible women who stepped in the ring with me. They were part of the journey as well. And I honor all of them in my book. But yes, I was intimidated, but I had a really good poker face, and I was determined. And because I was, Stan Ward became my coach. Like in the beginning, when I would go to gyms with Stan Ward, like these boys, these boxers, they wouldn't even call me by name. They called me Coach's Girl, because Stan Ward in the boxing world, he was only known as Coach. So in the boxing world, you say Coach, they know that's Stan Ward. So they knew me as Coach's Girl. So that was a big deal to get over that hump. But it was really a matter of me earning their respect, and that came through battle. After my first exhibition match, they call it an exhibition because it doesn't go on the books. It's not supposed to be a real fight. And I tell you, this exhibition was a battle. It was a war.
It was a real fight.
It was a real effing fight. And I got a standing 8 count in the first round of that fight. That's all in the book. I made it to the end, and to not reveal any spoilers. But it was that fight. It was that exhibition that really launched me up into the, earning more respect, because it was instant after that. There were a lot of boys from my gym, men from my gym, and from other gyms who watched me compete that day. And after that, I was one of them. That's what it took.
Oh,
But
isn't that great?
I thought when I got out of that ring, because I got the standing 8 count in the first round, that these boys would give me a lot of heat for it. But they didn't. It was a complete opposite. They were so proud of me and so complimentary about the fact that I got in there and I survived, and that after the standing 8, I didn't quit.
So you were the one.
Yeah.
So the standing 8 was you got knocked down, and then you got back up again, just like the song, right? Was
Yeah.
that you?
So, So the standing 8. I mean, Layla McCarter was my opponent, and she's still competing. She's still a boxer now. She's an 8-time world champion.
Wow.
So she was obviously, an amateur when I stepped in the ring with her. But yeah, I mean, it happened really quick. She obviously rang my bell, because the next thing I knew, my coach was standing in front of me, doing the 8 count.
Wow.
At the end of the 8 count, he asked me if I could go on. And I didn't want to go on. I wanted to quit. I wanted to run out of that ring and never go back. I was so terrified. I was so scared, but there was my pride wouldn't let me walk out of that ring. And I knew those boys from my gym were watching, and I knew I'd get a lot of crap if I quit. And so I didn't. I stayed in, and I'm still to this day amazed. I remember that fight like it was yesterday. I remember every fight like it was yesterday, and they're all in the book. And I did not win every fight, and those losses were hard. But I tell you, that exhibition was really, really the pivotal moment, was surviving that war.
Isn't that cool? I mean, it's just so interesting how these like transitional pivotal moments in your life. And I'll just tell you, for those of you who are watching who've never been hit in the head with a punch, there's something that there's like some evolutionary like lizard brain reaction to that is unbelievable. What it does to your brain and your body in terms of your own reaction is it's just, you literally shift into a gear you didn't know you had. That's the only thing I could do to explain that process. So pretty amazing. By the way, for those of you who just joined us, my name is Ed Rush. I'm here with Alicia Doyle. We're talking about, we're getting ready to talk about her book, A Fighting Chance. I do want to talk about writing too. By the way, as you're here on the show, we got some great stuff lined up for you this week and next. This Thursday, I'm going to go into part 2 of the Goal Fuel series. We're talking about how to set and achieve goals. I know, Alicia, you've been with us during this process as well. On Thursday, I'm going to talk about total mind control. There's actually 3 segments to that. One I've already begun to cover, but the other 2 we're going to get deep into. And I'm going to talk about this brain. I mentioned the brain, the lizard brain. By the way, that's a picture right there of your pineal gland. On Thursday, I'm going to explain why that's so important and how you could unlock and activate the power of a little tiny gland that's sitting inside of your brain. But today, we're talking about Alicia's life and journey through the story of boxing and how she became a professional or a competitive boxer and then lived to tell about it in her book, Fighting Chance. So let's kind of go into the competition a little bit. And then I do want to get into writing. We've got a lot of writers on the show that watch the show. And I want to talk a little bit about your process in writing and how you develop stories and how you tell great stories. But let's continue with your story. Let's get to the end, or at least where we are now. So you did your first match, and that opened up the door, I guess, to you becoming like a legitimate boxer here in California. And what happened next?
So after surviving that match, then I was obviously eligible for amateurs. So Stan Ward, he thought I did a fantastic job. So we signed up for amateurs right away. And because this was the 90s and not a whole lot of women were boxing at the time, anytime there was a national dinner or a national match, the same girls would show up at these places. So it was not unusual for me to fight the same girl more than once, simply because there weren't that many of us. So my first amateur match was the National Blue and Gold tournament. And I had to fight the same girl that kicked my butt in the exhibition match. I had to face her again in my first official fight. And I was, I had prepared to take the visualization, you train your butt off, and I was ready. I was there. I dropped weight. I was lean and mean. And then the boards come up and they show the names of all the matches. And I look up and I see Layla McCarter's name, and my heart sank. I just was like instantly terrified. And my coach saw the look on my face and he was like, "You're not the same fighter you were back then." He's like, "I know what you're thinking," and he said, "You'll do fine. You'll do fine." So, that was really the national tournament was my first actual fight on the books. The Golden Gloves championships came later, but both of those fights were wars, and I earned those titles. Those were hard girls to fight, but those came later.
Did you have a way of getting yourself mentally prepared for that kind of battle? Was there a meditation thing? Did you breathing
Yes.
exercises? Did you just sit in the back
Hmm.
and like
Yes.
think about your ex-boyfriend, or how did that work?
Yes, I had a very specific process. So sometimes at a match, an amateur match, fighters, while they're waiting to go into the ring for their fight, they like to watch the other fighters. They like to watch. I did not. In fact, so part of my process was I tried my hardest to not meet the girl that I was going to fight. I did not want to
Okay.
meet her. I didn't want to look her in the eyes because I knew the moment I met her, I would like her, and then I wouldn't be able to take her out. Okay, so
That's great.
that was one
Great.
thing. I This was the day of Walkman. So now how old I am. So I had a Walkman, and I had very specific songs on my Walkman, just to pump me up. The movie The Matrix.
Yeah.
I would watch that before every fight. The night before, the day I always watch The Matrix. There's songs from The Matrix I would listen to. And I would literally sit in a room in a meditative pose with my eyes closed, and I would just listen to these songs. I would imagine myself winning.
Ooh,
That's how
I
I
like
did
that.
it. And I had a very serious poker. I had a serious poker face. Yeah, because all my opponents were younger than I was. I was the old lady of boxing. There's one scene in my book where I talk about these girls, mad dogging me and calling me an old lady in Spanish, but that was part of the game. But yeah, so these girls. The poker face came in because I knew that I had ringmanship maturity because of my age. So the mad dogging them, the poker face, it was all a scare tactic. It was an intimidation
Yeah.
tactic. I wanted to break them down mentally before they got in there. It worked sometimes, but not always. I mean, I fought a Marine in one of my tournament matches, and that woman scared the life out of me. But yeah, so that was my process, the poker face, not meeting the girl because I knew I'd like them. But then after the match, whether I won or lost, I would always find the girl and I would embrace her and tell her what a great job she did, because these women are
Yeah.
amazing. These girls, how young they were to step in the ring with me, I can't even imagine how terrified they were.
I always found that interesting. You
So I
have
honor
these.
these women. I love that I was able to honor them. Hmm.
Yeah, it's just really cool. By the way, your prep stuff, I mean, it flows right into what I'm going to be teaching next week this week on the mind control stuff. The idea is you're training your brain into a frequency that creates a result. And I liked, you said you listen to certain music when you're back there. Like, for example, one of the things I teach, I listen to certain music during the day for certain reasons. Interestingly, there's a Matrix song that I have as a part of my workout mix. That is, I think the song itself is called Clubbed to Death, which is like this. It basically is like this work you up song. And part of the idea is you can create a frequency in your brain that is the right frequency for the mode that you're in, right? So if you're in a car going uphill over rocks, you're going to have a certain driving mode and a certain gear. If you're flying down the 5 freeway, you're going to have a certain driving mode and a certain gear, and you want to be like that as an entrepreneur. So I think it's really interesting how you were able to create that kind of mindset for yourself, which is really incredible. By the way, we should have a chance for you to ask your questions. So as we're here on the live show, if you have any questions for Alicia, you're welcome to jump in. We've got maybe about 10 minutes left in our interview today. So I want to get to some of the writing. You are a journalist at heart. I mean, this is where you started. This is how you became a boxer. This is what you're doing now. So you are a writer. Tell us what you've worked on. Tell us what you're working on now. And then I want to get a little bit into your process of writing. We've got at least 10 people in our community that are writing books right now. I've seen the book titles coming in. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yes. Background is in journalism. I've worked for some of the biggest metropolitan newspapers in Southern California. Journalism is much different than writing a book, certainly, but it helped me. It gave me a great background just in terms of the reporting, the accuracy, that sort of thing. That's why I was able to have a good background coming in. Fighting Chance, it only took me 20 years to write because the process is much more intense. It was very deep. It was very personal. My book is very raw. It's very vulnerable. And that's why it took so long to write. It was very difficult emotionally. But what made Fighting Chance so good, I believe, is because I journaled that entire time I boxed. I kept a journal. I wrote everything down. My coaches were very spiritual people. So my coaches, whenever they would say something spiritual or poignant, I would always write it down because it was just too unusual for me not to. So I had this great framework, and I knew I had something there. As far as the book coming out and taking 20 years to write, I was reluctant to be so vulnerable with people. There are things about me in that book that nobody knew about, and I didn't want people to know these things about me. Quite frankly, they're dark things, they're painful things. I didn't want to share my weaknesses, but then I realized that vulnerability is the one common denominator we all have. It's the one thing we all share. And if I cannot be vulnerable, I am not going to connect with a lot of people. So that's what made me do it. And also my father was a big encourager of that. He didn't want the story to die with me.
I'm going to give you an example of how powerful this is. This is our friend Robert, who says, this is a fascinating, beneficial piece of information, non-contact for the kids training. Thank you for that. What a blessing. I was bullied for years. And Robert, thank you, by the way, for your courage to share that. But what I find is, I'll give you a 30-second story. One of my clients had a story in her past about abuse, and it was deep abuse. She'd literally never told a single person besides her husband. And then she told me. And it was we were doing a coaching session together, and it just came out as a part of her story. And 3 months later, she was standing on my stage telling that story. Unbelievable how her journey went. And it was so powerfully liberating for her to be able to tell that story. But when she told the story, it gave so many other people in the audience permission to share their story that they were afraid to share too. So it was like, it created this moment of transparency where we all realized, wow, we're all broken and we're all in process. And you know what? Like the idea, this is why as like a teacher, I'm careful not to be like, hey, I'm practically perfect in every way. Like Mary Poppins, it's like, you're not. Life isn't practically perfect. So I just really appreciate you and thank you for sharing that and sharing that part of your story, because that vulnerability, I can imagine there's so many women who you've been able to touch because you've been able to share that story. So I really think that's great. Go ahead.
Oh, yes. I was going to say the best part of Fighting Chance coming out was all these women reaching out to me via email, women I didn't even know, sharing their story, sharing their story of abuse, being in domestic violence relationships and getting out of them, sharing their stories of survival. We're not victims anymore, we're survivors. Yeah. And, just this whole idea that we can break out of those negative patterns and get on the right path for ourselves. And it takes a lot of strength. But yes, when I came out with my story, I knew a lot of women had that story. So it's been very comforting to me to hear theirs. And that's been the best part of it, is being able to share this with other people.
That is so cool. Cool. Let's get in the writing process really quickly, because like I said, we've got some authors. How do you have a way of preparing for a fight? Do you have a way of preparing to write? Is there a process you go through? How do you overcome, the inevitable sort of looking at the blank screen, writer's block thing? How do you do that on a consistent basis as a journalist?
Well, the journalism and the newspaper world is that we had deadlines. So, I was always under a deadline. I was paid to be on staff. So, it had to meet deadlines. The book was a different process because it was on my own time. So I would carve out time every day. I'd like to go to my work first thing in the morning before I do anything, before I start checking emails, before I watch anything. And I want to be in the headspace going to the computer. The night before, I prepare. Before I go to sleep at night, I picture I call this segment intending. I don't know if I learned that from Joe Dispenza, who's a quantum physicist. You might be familiar with his work, but segment intending. So I go to sleep and I already set the intention of how my morning is going to go.
Ooh,
I imagine
like
myself
that.
waking up refreshed, feeling energized, excited about going to the work. It's important that I'm excited about going to the work. I might be a little bit frustrated, but I cannot be angry going to the work, because then it will come out in your writing. So I do that the night before. The next morning I wake up and I go to it first thing, and I dedicate time to it. 4 or 5 hours, or maybe 6 to 8, depending. And it doesn't matter how much I write. If I spend 4 hours and I only write 12 paragraphs, that's okay, as long as I'm putting that concentrated energy in it. And I do a lot of visualing. I have vision boards. I had a vision board created before Fighting Chance even came out. So I do a lot of visualization, a lot of imagining it done before it's done. I talk about it all the time like it's done. I'm just putting out that intention and creating it before it's there. If that makes sense, I'm creating it in the quantum field before it exists in the reality field. I don't know if that
I
makes
really
any
like
sense
that.
at all, but
It,
it works for
yes.
me.
I love this. I love this. I want to go deeper on this process. I'll tell you, the night before as a writer, I think the night before is really important. I've had times where I needed to write something or to be creative or to come up with a new idea. For example, every week I send an email out to my list that's called the Weekly Flight Brief. It's about 4 pages long on a Google document. It's a legit piece of writing every single week. And there are weeks where I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to write. I don't know what I'm gonna write. And then I literally give myself the task that afternoon or night. I say, all right, subconscious, your job is to come up with something great by tomorrow morning. And sure enough, I'll be like making breakfast and I'm like, oh, I forgot. I've been meaning to teach on, and it will just come out. So there is this process. You can really train your brain to process and give you ideas. I like that. And then I like the approach that you have where you say, hey, even if I write 12 paragraphs, that's what I wrote today, and I'm thrilled with that. So I think that's really cool. Did that same process work its way into the book for you when you were writing your book? Was that similar for that?
It was, and every day was different. It was a different process every day because my book was so emotional. The hardest parts to write were the chapters about my past. Having to relive it and put it down on
Yeah.
paper. That was a very difficult process. But and some of those parts, what I would do, and it helped me, was I would approach it like I was writing about somebody else. I
Ooh.
like would remove myself in my mind, like, okay, you're writing about somebody else. These things happen to somebody else. That was the only way I could get through that. But once I got through those chapters, the rest was much easier, because I'm writing about the fights, which were very exciting, and just all these amazing women and the whole journey. And of course my backstory is in there. Of course, I call them the heartbreak pieces. You mentioned being broken, and I talk about the heartbreak pieces that were all made of a jigsaw puzzle of all these pieces. And sometimes the heartbreak pieces are the hardest ones to fit in. We want to throw the heartbreak pieces away, but if you get rid of those pieces of yourself, you're not the full puzzle of who you are. And I believe the dark pieces of ourselves are what make us as beautiful as we are. Without these scars, we wouldn't exist. But it's our scars that make us amazing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I just think it's important for people to embrace those dark pieces of themselves, because those are the best parts of themselves.
Boy, oh boy. I mean, if all we did was that part of the interview, it would have been worth watching it. I love that. There's 2 parts to what you just said that I think are brilliant. First of all, the dark pieces I think are really important. I look at the dark pieces like a big one of those big blow up balls that you use in a pool, like a pool ball or whatever, those beach balls, basically. If you take a beach ball and you push it into the pool really far down, and you hold the beach ball down in the pool, eventually it's going to come flying out. And when it comes flying out, it's going to be very violent when it comes flying out. Or you could just accept the fact that there's a beach ball sitting on top of your water. And a lot of times with these dark stories from our past, these wounds that we've had, people push them down so far and they try to literally spend all their energy suppressing them. When if you just let it come up you're
Mhm.
going to find a community of
Mhm.
people who can relate to you and be like, thank you for telling that
Mhm.
story. I
Mhm.
really appreciated that. I have a story
Mhm.
like that too. The second thing, I love this. I love what you said. And this is a writing tip and tool that is worth your entire investment in this interview as you're watching us right now. She said at first she was writing like she was writing for someone else. When I started business writing, when I started copywriting, what I realized is I could write a kick-ass sales letter for someone else, but I had trouble writing it for me. And I would write these sales letters. People would be like, "My gosh, this is an amazing promotion." So what I actually did was I actually hired somebody to write for me for a while because they wrote a lot better about me than I was like too humble, frankly. I mean, really, when I was writing. So now I love this. This is such a super awesome secret that that I really don't share all that often. I love what you said. You were writing about you, but you were pretending that you're writing about someone else, and I think that is really really cool. So over to you, real quick, for any thoughts or comments on that, and then I've got one question for you. Then we're going to wrap up today's show. Go ahead.
Okay.
Sorry, okay? So here's a question from Barry. I'm going to ask you a question, and then I'm going to give you a chance to wrap it up. So he says, "Do you still plan a box, or to use it as an outlet for your past pain, or just write? What is your current plan?"
Oh, thank you, Barry. I'm no longer competing. I don't compete anymore, but I am a coach. I'm a coach at Kid Gloves, so I coach the children's class and the young adult class. I just teach them skills. But that's the biggest involvement I have. I still work out a lot, but I don't do any sparring or get hit in any way. I am still writing. I'm writing like a madman. I'm working on my second book. It's also based on a true story. It's about a woman, a female cop in the 1980s who faced incredible sexual harassment and discrimination on the job. There's a rape and double murder twist in this story. It is a true story, so there's crime involved. It's about an
Wow.
empowered woman. That's an incredible book. So that's what I'm working on now. It's not as hard as fighting chance because I'm writing about something else. So that's what I'm doing now, and I love that.
Very, very cool. All right,
Oh,
so we're
thank you,
just about
Barry.
to wrap up today's show. I just want to say there's a website below that you can go to. I'm just going to pull my screen up real quick, and I'm going to show you the website that is below. I would love for you to take the opportunity to go over to Alicia's website. It's very simply aliciadoyle.com. When you get here, you can read about the book. You can learn about her speaking and her fighting. And her writing. And I would love for you to go there just to honor her for the investment of her time here in this interview today. It's aliciadoyle.com. I'm just going to leave that website below, and it's also in chat. So we've got just a few minutes left. Alicia, take us home. Give us your parting shots for today's time together.
The biggest thing I want people to take away from this is to love yourself and to honor yourself, and especially honor those broken pieces or those things, those parts about you that you think are broken, because you're not broken. You're perfect the way you are. We all have something very unique to bring into this world, and we are alive in an incredibly challenging time. I believe that we are here for a reason, and we're all being forced to adjust and figure things out, and it's a daily process sometimes, but the bottom line is we got to love ourselves first. You love yourself first, and everything will follow from there.
All right, you got it, and you heard it here first. Alicia Doyle, thank you for your time and for the interview today. Man, I just have a page of notes. We started by talking about your journey in boxing. We went into your processes, how you got ready for matches. We talked about the writing process, how you were vulnerable in your writing and how you went through that. So today's show is awesome. Thank you for the time and thank you for your input today. Please put your comments in chat. I'd love for her to be able to see your takeaways from today's show. But thank you very much. You are amazing. Don't forget, we are live every Tuesday and Thursday right here on YouTube and Facebook, depending on where you love to watch it. This Thursday shows the Total Mind Control, part of the Gold Fuel series. I've got about 4 shows planned on this next episode. I'm going to be showing you how to completely dominate your thoughts, leading to successful accomplishment of your goals. And I've got some great new stuff coming down the pike, including an additional show that I'm going to be telling you about real soon. I will talk to you very soon this Thursday. Ed Talks Live is out.